"Don't be cross, uncle," said the nephew. "What else can I be?" returned the uncle, "when I live in such a world of fools as this? Merry Christmas! Out upon Merry Christmas! What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money? A time for finding yourself a year older but not an hour richer?" "If I could work my will," said Scrooge indignantly, "every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled in his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart." "Uncle," pleaded the nephew. "Nephew," returned the uncle sternly, "keep Christmas in your own way and let me keep it in mine." "Keep it?" repeated Scrooge's nephew. "But you don't keep it." "Let me leave it alone, then," said Scrooge. "Much good may it do you. Much good it has ever done you." The nephew replied, "There are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited. I dare say Christmas among the rest. In fact, I have always thought of Christmas as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time, the only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely, and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave, and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good, and will do me good, and I say God bless it." I can't help but return to Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol every year. I first read it when I was in junior high, and it's stayed with me ever since. And Dickens has a wonderful way to carry a phrase and to turn the English language into poetry. And of course, we're all familiar with that character Scrooge, who's changed, who experiences Christmas and finally discovers what the season is all about. But I want to focus on this evening on that one particular phrase that I just read, where the nephew replies to Scrooge's hard-heartedness, and he says, "Christmas is the time of year when we look upon others as if they were fellow passengers to the grave, and that they're not just another race of creatures on another journey." I find that actually very significant as a pastor, because it says in Scripture that we were all created in the image of God. And if there's anything that Christmas time reminds us of, it's our humanity. There's something very simple in the Christmas story about Christ coming as a child. It's very significant. It says in the book of John that the Word became flesh. That idea of heaven and earth being bound together at Christmas, in essence, the Spirit and our flesh coming together as one, is a deep theological truth. But Dickens captures the fact that because of that truth, we're really all the same. We all have the same needs, and in some ways we all have the same desires. You know, at Christmas we think a lot about desire and want, especially since the 1800s, since the time of Dickens, when Christmas has become so commercial, where industry and where profit has replaced a lot of the meaning of the season. And of course we talk about this, it seems like every year, we talk about Jesus being the reason for the season, and we want to return to the simplicity of the story and remind ourselves that Christmas is all about our faith. But it's almost impossible to escape the fact that Christmas has become commercialized. And it's not even necessarily about profit, as Scrooge seems to suggest, or as the story of Scrooge seems to tell us. It's really more about the fact that we are human beings, and that we are wrapped up in the desire of things. But what is really important is that we start viewing others as fellow passengers, and that, more importantly, we view others not as another race or other creatures who are bound on some other journey, that we're all on the same journey. We all have something longing in us. We all have a desire. And we obviously are rightly critical of those who desire nothing but commercial goods, or who desire the latest trend or the latest technology, who just want to make Christmas about giving. But we should realize that the real desire of our hearts, what is really missing, ultimately is the presence of Christ. And if we do that, then we can recognize that every human being needs the presence of Christ. And if we have that perspective, if we look at others as fellow passengers, if we look at others who are bound on the same journey, then we treat them differently. And really that's what this is all about. Scrooge, if you read the entire Christmas Carol, I'm going to give you a few other devotions. If you read the entire thing, there really is a subtext to all of this, and that is how Scrooge treats people. He doesn't treat his clerks very well. He ends up not treating his girlfriend very well. He doesn't treat his nephew very well. It's all about how he treats people, and you find out through the story that the reason he doesn't treat people very well is because, not only because he's self-centered, but because he doesn't view them as human beings. And it takes this spiritual experience ultimately to change his heart. The same is true for us at Christmas. We have to have a spiritual awakening or realization that the human beings around us have the same desires that we have. It's written into our hearts, it's written into our minds, it's written into our souls. Our desire ultimately is to have the presence of God. And Christmas is about Christ coming to us. So we don't have to strain, we don't have to work hard anymore. We don't have to desperately try to find the path. The way has come to us. The Word has become flesh, and Christ is with us. And when we look at others, we know that they are longing for the same thing. They are fellow passengers to the grave. In other words, this life is fleeting. This life is a moment. And it is worth treating others as if they were on the same journey. It is worth treating others not as if they were creatures on another journey, but that they are with us. And again, all of this is to say, think about how we treat people. Do we think of them as something other? Do we think of them as fellow passengers? Or are they simply people that are in our way? Are they people who ultimately stop our desires, who are ultimately a threat to our desires, who are ultimately competing for our desires? Think about how Scrooge treated his nephew. He wanted to destroy this idea of Christmas. That wonderful phrase where he says, every person who says Merry Christmas should be boiled in pudding and buried with a stick of holly in his heart. Why does Scrooge treat people that way? It's because he doesn't see the Imago Dei. He doesn't see the presence of God. Well, when we see the presence of God, when we know the presence of God, we can treat others accordingly. And even more importantly, we can say, God bless it. God bless Christmas, for it is a time of good, a time of charity, a time of forgiveness, a wonderful time, as the nephew says, where human beings freely consent to treat each other as fellow passengers.